Hi, I welcome you all to walk with me on this journey of inquiry into cancel culture and its implications on free speech. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. What is cancel culture?
My opinion about cancel culture is that it's sort of a vaguely defined term. It means different things to different people.
I honestly don't have a particularly clear understanding of what the term means.
My understanding of cancel culture is not entirely well versed.
Very American concept.
I'm not too familiar with cancel culture.
There are different definitions of cancel culture sort of floating around.
As you can see, cancel culture is one of those terms that does not have a commonly agreed upon definition, which makes it hard to define, let alone its implications on free speech. But everything is complex until you start digging. I was curious to know what makes cancel culture so difficult to speak about and so controversial if someone speaks about it. So, I chased this feeling of hesitation until I finally caught Mr. Ernest Owens at his book launch at the Harvard bookstore.
Cancel culture is the poison to those in power that have benefited from unchecked free speech. When conservatives on Fox News declare that it's a free country and that cancel culture is un-American, they forget speech works two ways. It allows for discourse to take place, but grants all voices can be heard. In other words, straight white men and other people with power aren't used to getting pushback for the ways they conduct themselves. And cancel culture has reset the ways society can react. Those who fear cancel culture may claim they fear suppression of speech, but it's accountability that they want to avoid.
For starters, in my book, I clarify that cancel culture is not a left-wing issue, a right-wing issue, conservative, Democrat. Everybody cancels. And that is something I make clear in my book. And I define cancel culture in my book as when a person chooses to cancel a person, place, or thing that they find detrimental to their way of life. When we're talking about people who are deciding to cancel things because they really feel like it's a part, it hits at the core of their morals, their beliefs, their way of life, their the way that they, function in society, that becomes of a magnitude. So I'll give a good example. Let's say, for example, that you go to a coffee shop and you say, you know what, I don't want to drink any of their coffee here because it just doesn't taste good. They don't really have a good variety in section, so I'm not going to go here. That's not cancel culture. But let's say that you decide that you do not want to go to this coffee shop and you tell others not to go here because the people at this coffee shop does not pay their workers a livable wage, or that they're using, cocoa beans from an exploited part of the world, and those people are not getting a fair share, or it's bad for the environment. That would be cancel culture. And I want to be clear that in my book, I look at cancel culture as a tool. It's not necessarily a political belief or an ideology.
I was wondering what the ultimate goal of cancel culture is. Is it the cancellation of people, or is it the cancellation of an idea through the cancellation of people?
So I think, to be honest, is that I'm not focused so much on in my book specifically, the consequences of what happens. People are like, well, what should people do? How to book? Maybe that's a sequel, maybe. But I was focused more on just the ability for people to have dissent. I think sometimes we put the cart before the horse and making assumptions that everybody's already doing this. Everybody got these resources. Let's just get it. We have to recognize that we're still suppressing people in this country from being able to fully exercise their First Amendment rights.
This makes my inquiry a lot more interesting. Is cancel culture a First Amendment issue, or is it an idea that exists on social media? If yes, where does my free speech begin and yours end? I was full of questions which I wanted answers to. So I decided to speak to Lata, the senior legal counsel at Campaign Legal Center.
I want to make a distinction right away, if you don't mind, between free speech and the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects us from the government censoring our speech and punishing us for our speech. So it doesn't apply to private actors and what we might do to each other. I would say that free speech as a value, like we often say at the Freedom Forum, there are issues that are First Amendment issues, and then there are issues that are kind of First Amendment-ish. Like maybe it's not something that necessarily is protected by the First Amendment, but it has First Amendment or free speech implications. I think that at its best, cancel culture is like is a way for people who may not have a lot of power individually to, as a group, like use maybe their spending power or like and to actually exert influence over systems that are larger than they are. And like the best example I would give of that would be, say, during the American Civil Rights Movement, the Montgomery bus boycott, where you had civil rights leaders like organize a boycott of segregated businesses and government institutions, and were able to create a lasting change from that. And yes, you can, if you would like, call that canceling, because I think boycotting sort of falls under that umbrella. But I don't think that is usually how people are using the power of cancellation. Because because the thing is for a tool for political and social change, you kind of have to think about it like, if you're trying to solve a structural problem, then canceling an individual won't necessarily make a difference.
Cancel culture and its historic relevance to the civil rights movement and the American Revolution. Now that's an interesting perspective to this conversation. Let us hear what our other experts have to say about this. I seem to be getting somewhere, or at least I hope so.
Certain examples: the Boston Tea Party. When those who were going against British tyranny dumped tons of tea down Boston Harbor. They didn't dump that tea because they didn't think the tea was tasty. They dumped it because they were speaking out against being taxed without representation. So that is one example of successful cancel culture. The Montgomery bus boycotts in the 1950s, during the civil rights movement. That is an extraordinary example of cancel culture, successful cancel culture. They did not boycott those buses because they were not good. They didn't ride well. They were speaking out against the Jim Crow South. And the fact that they were able to do that, to me, was an extraordinary example of cancel culture.
I don't really think that, I don't really understand what cancel culture is. I think that it's conflated with a variety of just and unjust instances to serve other people's interests. To the point of the Boston Tea Party, I wouldn't necessarily call that cancel culture, but what I would say is that, it was a tactic used to protest against, in this case, the British government and the East India Tea Company, and that protest included the destruction of property, right? Now we celebrate the Boston Tea Party nationally, kind of broadly, right? I'm sure there's someone out there in America who thinks the Boston Tea Party was bad, but as a rule, we teach it like it's a celebratable moment, kind of one of the beginnings of the American Revolutionary Movement. We don't always celebrate the destruction of property for political means. There's in the Ursuline fire at a convent in Charlestown in the 1830s, a group of anti-Catholic nativists evoke the Boston Tea Party as they burned down a convent because they accused that convent of holding a woman there against her will with no evidence. In the late 19th century, workers destroy property to protest against unfair contracts that train companies are putting on them. In the 1970s, the Weather Underground destroys numerous buildings for a variety of political reasons, including, but not limited to, oil companies drilling in Angola. On January 6th, we saw the destruction of property on the Capitol building for people who believed, rightly or wrongly, I would say wrongly, that the election was stolen. You also had Black Lives Matter protests where property was destroyed. In all of those instances, you see a huge segment of the American population saying that property destruction is wrong, But if you ask them if the Boston Tea Party was good, I bet most of them would say, yeah, it was great. So when we talk about things like the concept of cancel culture and the tactic of ostracizing somebody for what they say or what they do, I would posit that virtually nobody thinks that we shouldn't ostracize people for certain positions. It's whether or not you agree with the position.
While we continue to ponder over our positions on the historic relevance of cancel culture and free speech, let us look at cancel culture at a more personal level. Have you ever felt the need to censor your speech, or even worse, your thought, while speaking about certain sensitive topics? Are you able to truly exercise your right to free speech without the fear of any sociocultural repercussions? Are you able to voice your opinions without a second thought about your First Amendment free speech? Or is there a lingering fear in your mind that is stopping you from truly expressing your opinions?
What is the worst possible scenario that you can imagine if you said everything you believed?
Wow. Okay. Somebody says every single thing that's on their mind, everything, and this is a very bad person. Let's her hypothetical person says some really terrible things. Okay. The absolute worst thing that could happen is if something that was on their mind was like a true threat to someone's life. In which case, the First Amendment doesn't apply to true threats, and you can be arrested for that. That's a crime, threatening someone with bodily harm. Or the First Amendment also doesn't protect immediate incitement to violence or lawless action. So if you happen to be a person saying everything that's on your mind in front of a huge mob of people, and you tell them to go burn down that store over there, and they do it, then you could be arrested for that. Again, that's kind of a limited circumstance, right? But these are places where the First Amendment doesn't apply. And then to me, the worst possibility legally would be that you go to jail, that you're imprisoned, right?
Speaking of individual rights, I got the opportunity to speak to Graham Pirro about cancel culture and free speech in educational institutions. Graham is the Campus Rights Advocacy Program Officer at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, also known as FIRE.
Cancel culture is something that is having an impact both on and off campus. And there are different definitions of cancel culture sort of floating around. But basically, we connected and see it as connected to self-censorship. Surveys of the past year or two have shown that self-censorship is something that is not just staying relegated to college campuses, but is also having an impact off campus. And so, for example, last year in January, FIRE conducted a survey that found that nearly 6 in 10 respondents felt that American democracy was threatened because people are afraid to voice their opinions. And interestingly, as part of that survey, almost 75% of respondents said that they were familiar with the concept of cancel culture. And of those people familiar with the term, almost 60% said that it was a threat to our freedoms. Now that's off campus, generally speaking, in terms of the state of, American society in general. On campus, there are indications that self-censorship is also a growing problem. Just over 3 in 5 students, according to a recent survey that was released late last year, I believe from the Buckley program, over 3 in 5 students say that they are frequently or sometimes they feel intimidated to share ideas, opinions, or beliefs in class that differ from those of their classmates or peers.
I think I've tended to surround myself with people who value all opinions and actually listen to people. So personally, I have not had as much of an impact on my speech because my friends like to listen and have open discourse about various topics, including politics, environment, science, history, everything. However, I had some friends in high school that were very, very progressive in high school, which I also was, but I wasn't as progressive as them. And so there was a lot of woke policing type things happening where I was on the same page as them and I believed the same things, but because I didn't get it into a one-sentence soundbite, it wasn't correct. And so I think in that regard, yes, I have been hindered by it, but I don't think that it really impacts my day-to-day life because I have friends who listen and are open about various conversations with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it causes a lot of self-censoring. I think you're afraid a little bit to not speak what you think just because you're not from here and there are other people who kind of feel entitled that they are correct automatically. So I've had some experiences like that where I feel like I'll have to be a little bit more quiet about certain things or maybe like not have an opinion on things to avoid a conflict.
Yeah. I would say first no, and then secondly yes as well. So the no is kind of the more classical, like I've never felt like if I said something that I believed on campus, I would be punished or hurt for it. But also there are many times where I don't say something that I think or want, possibly because it's not the right venue for it or I'm not in the right group, or also oftentimes if you say something, even if it is something totally reasonable, but that the people around you disagree with, like if you have to defend that can just be more troublesome than it's worth, I would say. So on the very far side, I've never not said something because I'm worried about getting ostracized or having any repercussions because of something. But I also have absolutely not spoken of my ideas, political beliefs, or whatever because I don't think it's worth the effort to try and convince a group of people who don't share that belief and probably won't. And also it might not be the right space.
I do. Definitely it's the certain environments because there are so many, like there's certain friend groups and different social groups I'm in where I feel open, I'm able to speak freely, especially with my closer friends. But there are also some groups, organizations, clubs that I'm part of that I do feel I know something or like I want to speak about something, but I kind of hold my tongue around those certain people. But I don't think I felt limited in what I could speak, I guess, in terms of like that freedom of speech. I don't feel restricted because I always feel like I have that option to speak out if I wanted to. It's just more when I feel like I'm holding my tongue, I think I do it for more the other people around me. Like if I think that it might spur an argument or spur something that like spur conflict, for example, and something that I wouldn't want, or I feel like maybe that conflict would be like pointless, I do tend to hold my tongue just because, I'd rather not waste time and talk about other things and not waste time on, arguments that in the end are kind of boil down to something pretty pointless.
So, where does this all leave me? Frankly speaking, even I do not know. But what I do know is the fact that undertaking this project of exploring cancel culture and free speech has left me with a far more nuanced understanding of cancel culture and its implications on free speech. I went into this project without being aware of the multiple positions that lie on the spectrum of cancel culture and free speech and the multiple definitions that people had. All that I was aware about going into this project was the pro and anti-cancel culture narrative, which was popularly discussed on social media. But as I started to speak to people more, I discovered that people lie somewhere on the spectrum of their beliefs on cancel culture and free speech, and not just pro and anti-cancel culture. As far as cancel culture's implications on free speech in educational institutions are concerned, I do know that students do not feel safe or comfortable sharing certain sensitive topics or having an open discussion around them, which is something concerning in my opinion. Self-censorship of words, or even worse, self-censorship at the level of thought, is not something that should be encouraged at any level. At universities should be a safe space for students to think and speak freely without the fear of any retribution. Because it is when we create an environment conducive to free speech, is when we foster creative minds to question the world around them. And if students don't have that freedom to think and speak freely in their classrooms, in their peer groups, and universities, that seems to be an issue to me that needs to be taken care of. And as far as questions about cancel culture and free speech are concerned, what are your opinions on cancel culture and its implications on free speech?